Thank you for bringing me here. Because 90% of the film happens basically in those two houses, it was a very fun challenge for me and the production designer. So even from the script writing stage, I already had the basic idea for the structure of these houses, particularly the rich house, because the blocking was very important. So I had many requests to the production designer. We poured mud water into the set for the flood sequences. But the water looks dirty, but for the sake of the actors, we actually added like a facial mud mask into the water to give it that color.
It is very clean and safe.
So I wanted that sequence to feel like a road movie in the rain. As the characters move from the rich house to the poor house, they descend vertically further below, and I wanted the spaces to sort of connect seamlessly. So compared to Snowpiercer and Okja, Parasite had a much smaller budget, and the film is very focused on these two spaces. But in terms of the themes and story, I was more ambitious with this film. So when we were little, we would use magnifying glasses to burn very small dots onto the paper, and you would always see the smoke coming from the paper from this tiny dot focused from the sunlight. And I really wanted to portray that sort of excitement and joy that comes from that tiny dot burning. So it's not as if I write my script thinking about how I can surprise the audience or break their expectations. I think it just happens because I have a weird personality. I really mean it. I think in large part it's due to the characters. In this film with the rich family, you don't really see them as the conventional greedy, malicious villains you often see on screen. There are really no villains in this film, but even then the film ends with this huge disaster. And I think we can ask the question of why. Why does a film end that way without these villains? And I think that's a sad part of this film. And because the characters, it's very ambiguous to tell who's nice and who's the bad guy, who's the good guy. I think that's why the film is more unpredictable. So in the film, you see Mr. Park constantly talking about not crossing a line. So he's basically drawing an invisible line for himself. So in the marketing process, we always describe this film as a story about two families, but actually there's a third family in the basement. And I think maybe if the film didn't have that third family, they might have been able to keep that line. I'm very moved that all you guys came on this Sunday morning to watch this quite scary film. I think people who watch movies on Sunday mornings are the true cinephiles.
Thank you.
I always consider myself as a genre filmmaker.
영화를 볼 때
When I create films, I always like to focus on the beauty of cinema itself, the excitement that comes from genre. Those are the films that I grew up watching. So I don't really like films that wave that political flag right in front of your face. I would rather the audience enjoy the beauty of the film and the excitement that comes from the genre elements and go home after the film, lie in bed to go to sleep, and you end up constantly thinking about the film and thinking about the human condition that this film presents. And the films that I want to create are the ones that just stays with you, stops you from going to bed because you're so wrapped up in thinking about the remnants of the film. So depending on the situation, the characters feel malicious, they seem greedy, and sometimes you even pity them. So in this film, all the characters are very far from violence. They're not gangsters, they're not criminals, but the narrative sort of ends with that disaster in the end, and I think that's the sadness and fear of being human, that things can get there even without villains. So in regards to Song Kang-ho, I already wrote the script with him in mind, and that was the case for the Kim son as well. They were actors that I worked with before, but the rest, it was my first time working with them. But from the very beginning, I prioritized that this is an ensemble piece and that all 10 characters are very important, including the little boy. So song in particular is very meaningful to me because when I write this character and write dialogue, knowing that he will say them and play it, I feel more comfortable. I can become bolder with my script. And so even when I'm writing unique, strange, and challenging scenes with him in mind, I know that he'll be able to convince the audience. I did recommend Baroque music and Bernard Herrmann to the composer for inspiration. So when the poor family enters the rich house, they pretend to be all elegant and sophisticated. And of course, I appreciate the beauty of Baroque music, but I felt that it really suited that sort of pretension that this poor family was putting on. So in a good way, that scene was very traumatic and ingrained in my mind. So I always had this desire to mix the structure of the house and the music from that film. So I'm someone who loves film history and genre conventions, but at the same time, as a Korean director, I'm very sensitive to the reality of Korea, and I always observe what happens in my daily life set in Korea. So whenever I try to break or steer away from genre conventions, I think I always reflect the air and the atmosphere that's specifically Korean and bring that to my films, which creates that sort of strange and unique nuance to my film. So when I screened the film at Cannes, a lot of people in the audience from various countries laughed at that scene at the same time. So I thought that maybe every country has a song like that where they use the melody to memorize things. It's something that's used very often in Korean schools when students need to memorize complicated things. So that is a nickname that people call me by in Korea. I was just surprised how you know about it. But that doesn't mean that, I harass my crew members at every second during production. It's just that when a small part of the film sort of reflects the entirety of it, that's when I really focus on the small things. So you guys should ask him. Ask him on whether or not I harass my crew members on small details. I think every director has this desire to shoot a really memorable rain sequence. So the DP and I were very ambitious with that sequence. In the film, it seems like a connected road, but actually every shot was shot in a different neighborhood across Seoul. And because the other locations were set on the sets that we built, we were really able to focus location scouting on that sequence and spend our time and energy there. So among the shots, there's one in particular that features a very long and vertical staircase, and it's located in a small corner of Seoul, and I was very happy when we found that location. I felt that we could really encompass the film in that shot, particularly on the shot where the protagonist is standing there, and you basically see a waterfall falling through his feet. So water always flows from top to bottom and never flows the other way around. So I really wanted to emphasize the sense that water pours from the rich to the poor. In the past decade since the Korean War, Korea has achieved incredible development and advancement. Now it's basically a wealthy country, but within that, the relative inequality and gap has widened ever more, and I think that's something that applies to not just Korea, but any country across the world. And so, we screened this film at Cannes, in Sydney, Germany, various places, but people seem to respond very similarly. So I never really intended for the story to be universal, but naturally it happened that way. And I really thought about why the responses are similar. And the conclusion that I came to is that regardless of borders, we all live in this one giant nation of capitalism. So personally, and for Korean cinema, it was a huge honor. After the award, I talked to the jury members to Iñárritu over cocktails, and when I told them that coincidentally this marks the 100th anniversary of Korean cinema, they were all very surprised to discover that Korean cinema has such a long history. Because relative to Japan and China, Korean cinema was introduced to the international audience pretty later on. So a huge inspiration for Parasite was a Korean classical film called The Housemaid by Kim Gi-young, and I really recommend that you all watch this film. That also features a lot of staircases and a two-story house.